trying to think like how to start this conversation. My fucking favorite. A month ago, you had a string of tweets. You tweeted, "America has a problem. Whoever controls the media controls the mind." And then end of an empire. And obviously you've been supporting Kennedy, pretty vocal. Like, what does that mean?
Well, the first two were actually because I was at a Beyonce concert, and one of her songs is named "America Has a Problem," and it obviously resonates with a lot of what people are thinking right now. And being able to acknowledge that and admit it, help us solve it, is important. And she had a slide up. That second quote is by Jim Morrison. So there was a visual with that quote up on the stage in her performance by Jim Morrison. And, you know, it's, again, it just like resonated immediately, and I had to post it.
What's the problem? What did it resonate with? It's an insane thing to tweet.
The media one or the America Has a Problem one?
I don't know, all of it. I feel like it's all related.
I hope it's not insane to tweet that America has a problem. I hope we can admit that, like, the country that we love, we can acknowledge where there are issues and that we want to, you know, address them and fix them. The second one, in terms of media, I mean, that's always been the case, right? I mean, media definitely has a capacity to control the mind, control people's opinions and influence them deeply. And whether it's a more centralized media, as we've been living with for hundreds of years, or more of a decentralized media that's more hyper-local, it still influences people, and we can't take for granted the fact that, like, we don't wake up and open up our phones and read something and that kind of sets the tone for the day, or maybe even our thinking. And hopefully just like meditating on that quote a bit helps us realize, you know, maybe I want to think twice about what I just read, or go to a different source, or not react to it. I think all these things are ultimately a decision on how we react to the statements and the information put before us. The last one was not at the Beyonce concert. The last one was what was it?
End of an empire?
End of an empire. I have been listening a lot to Robert F. Kennedy's podcast and speeches, and just taking a lot more in. And one major part of his platform is around this concept of an American empire, this ever-expanding organization that goes around the world and has all these offensive wars, and is killing people in our name. And it didn't just start; it's been going on for World War I, after World War II. I think we got a lot more aggressive, and he points to the military-industrial complex and its role, that profit incentive continuing to drive more and more of these wars and more of these battles that have nothing to do with us, nothing to do with the battles that we face in our country, the battles we face with our own people and what they're struggling with. And what I meant by that is it feels like we are a generation that sees the end of this empire mindset. And I don't think that's a bad thing for America. I think that's going to be a strength. I think it allows us to focus on what we've ignored for some time. We've been so focused on expansion of our values that we haven't looked as deeply as we need to in terms of what's happening in our own country with our own people. And are they happy? Are they healthy? Do they have free agency, autonomy, and all those things that have made America what it is, and impact that story. So I think we are coming to the end of that mindset, that empire expansion, that American empire. And a lot of it, we've talked about in the past, has to do with money as well. Like the greatest export we have is the U.S. dollar. And that is certainly being challenged right now by a number of things, by China and a building coalition around the yuan. And I hope and I believe a third entrant, which is Bitcoin, and one that actually has the potential to be truly owned by the people, and if not owned by the people, at least visible and transparent to the people, which I think has been the biggest issue with the money
Mm-hmm.
in the past, as you know, as us in the Bitcoin space have diagnosed, rightly or wrongly. I think majority rightly, but I believe having more of a shared concept of money that is not led by a government, not owned by a government, not owned by a corporation, has no gatekeeper, is permissionless to build upon, permissionless to use, and is the only truly at-scale censorship-resistant technology that I'm aware of.
Mm-hmm.
You can argue maybe Tor is, maybe the greater internet is, but this was designed to be exactly that, and it's scaling one of the most important aspects and fundamental aspects of our society, which is money, the exchange of value, the exchange of information.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to start with it because when I was sitting at home and I saw you tweet it, I was like, let's fucking go. Like, because you're right. It's not that it's a problem that you can say that America has a problem. It, like, people feel offended. Like, it's almost as if you say, like, hey, does America have an issue? And people are like, how the fuck could you say such a thing?
Yep.
And then even Dylan was like, you think the board is mad at him? And it's like, for what? For like questioning if America has a problem? Because if it doesn't have a problem, it doesn't have a problem. What's the problem in asking?
Yep.
But it's like a culture in the country that's just like, so anyway, I think like no one speaks up about it. Like you are expected not to say shit like that, which is insane.
Yep.
But like, so I guess I don't really disagree with you, but what is the problem to you? Like I start there because I feel like all those tweets somehow rhyme, like the cadence in which you tweeted them. Maybe, I mean, I'm sitting with you. Maybe you could tell me that it was like a total accident, but like they feel
I don't think
connected.
There's accidents. Yeah. I think I don't think there are no coincidences. There are no accidents. And if there are, they're happy accidents. What is the problem? I don't know. I think one is like, we're not willing to say that we have a problem, like what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
We're not willing to we're not willing to acknowledge, we're not willing to diagnose, we're not willing to not all of us, but you know, the majority is blissfully ignoring a bunch of issues for a variety of reasons. And I think if there's a lot that RFK points out in terms of problems in regulatory capture. The profit incentive from a number of corporations, whether that be military corporations making weapons, whether it be pharmaceutical companies making medicines and medications and supplements, whether it be technology or media companies who are stuck in this cycle, just trying to grow at any cost. All those things have removed the human element and have removed empathy from the equation. And what really resonated with me when I listened to him is he's the first real candidate that is not on talking points. He answered every single question with one of curiosity. Mm-hmm. For any topic he talks about, and it's pretty broad, he answers it with a willingness to be wrong and to reinvestigate his understanding and his bias, which I think is fairly rare. And he comes at it and speaks in a way that is very much of a humanitarian approach and just vocabulary. And that, you know, that reminded me a lot of his uncle and his father, who were certainly heroes of my family. Like we had in my house, we had pictures of Jesus up, and we had pictures of John F. Kennedy up on the wall. and I grew up idolizing the guy, and I was born after he died, but like he would, everything he represented, the core of it was peace and these humanitarian ideals.
Mm-hmm.
And I think RFK has taken that on and recognized, that this regulatory capture is real, and it needs to be ended. And there's a whole suite of problems that derive from that. Us in the Bitcoin space, like, we focused a lot on the problem of money and the Federal Reserve, and the banks and the financial institutions that we've dealt with in building companies or just dealt with as individuals. I think that's certainly a big aspect. There's, a common phrase in the Bitcoin community that Bitcoin fixes this, and
Mm-hmm.
fixes this means everything,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely everything. And I think it's less about the technology of Bitcoin. I think it's more about the thinking and the principles of Bitcoin that has the potential to at least fix a lot of these problems that we've been discussing and that we feel on a regular basis.
Yeah. Well, what do you think broke? Like, do you think, like, because when you say America is unhealthy or has a problem and the empire is going to end, America was started a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, at what point, and you referenced like a recent version of America is what I think I hear you saying. And like, what broke? Was it the money that broke? Was it profit-seeking incentives that broke? Is like, what to you broke it? Because actually, quickly, I think Robert Kennedy has captured America so quickly because he's really embodied the current state of this country, where here you have a human that's just perpetually curious and passionately authentic.
Mm-hmm.
He actually, in my opinion, never claims he's really right about anything. He's just open to listening and open to questioning.
Yeah.
And I think that people are all of a sudden being reminded of that's what this country is all about and being human is all about.
Mm-hmm.
And then who's opposing him is like a reflection in the mirror of people that are like, you're not allowed to ask questions. You're not allowed to be curious. Because I think he's very open in his conversation with Rogan of being wrong. But it's like the mere fact that he wanted to question in the first place was such an issue. So I think he's captured the energy in this country in a presidential like candidate,
100%.
which is like so fascinating. I think that's why it's happened so fast. It's like hyper growth.
Yeah.
But like, I guess so I've heard you talk about Bitcoin and I've heard you talk about JFK dying. Like when do you think it started? Or maybe, I don't know, maybe you don't fucking know, but like, what's the problem?
I mean, I don't think there's any one variable you can point to say like that's when it broke or that's the thing that broke us. I think all these things tend to be compounding, and there are major like milestones along the way. I think the assassination of Kennedy by our own government was a major milestone.
So you think the CIA killed JFK?
100%, without a doubt. 100%. Like and that was leading up to yet another milestone. The Iraq War was a milestone, and how that was, fabricated in terms of the reasoning to go to another country that we had nothing to do with, and declare war on their people.
Can we double click on the JFK assassination?
Mm-hmm.
So you feel like our own government killed the soul of America in John F. Kennedy.
Yeah. I mean that was
why.
Why did they kill it? Well, I mean the reasons that at least have been articulated is there was he wanted to pull back. He distrusted the military industrial complex. He distrusted his generals. He distrusted the CIA, and they were pushing him to do unnatural things like what happened in Cuba, and do unnatural things like Vietnam, and continue to push. 2 weeks after he died, maybe it was a week or maybe even a matter of days, his order was reversed, and we went full force into Vietnam with Lyndon B. Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty evident that there was some sort of agenda related to that. But they also, maybe just felt they lost power. They being this military industrial complex. And I don't know if like it's as singular in terms of drive as it may feel. I think these compounding events like build upon one another and then create this momentum that is very hard to get out of, including for the people who are part of it, and take part. And they may regret later on in their life when they look back, but in the moment, I think the momentum naturally takes over and they become blind to particular things, including things that hurt our country. And I believe that did kill the soul of our country, but it was certainly one milestone amongst many, and I think we keep having them, and they just continue to compound.
What about the industrial complex? Like, when did that problem start? Because I guess, like, to me, America is an idea. It's like the greatest startup of all time. Yep. And that it has it's this set of ideals and visions, and like you buy in and you migrate to America because you believe in the founders to execute the vision. Just like why someone would fucking join Twitter, because they believe in the vision and they believe in your ability to execute it.
Yep.
But it's like anything else, it's forever an idea. It's never a guarantee, and like inevitably it either has to change or fall, right?
Yep.
But so the industrial so you think that the you think that the incentive for profit industrial complex really enforcing ourselves upon the world, they needed to kill JFK, who was more like represented freedom fighting America, and like so
started the Peace Corps.
When did all that start? Like, in your opinion?
I mean, I'm not a historian, but I imagine like World War II, after World War II, with the the continuation of the fight with the Russians and the Soviet Union, and it became a very profitable business. And the Cold War was extremely profitable, and wars are extremely profitable.
Are you familiar with like the Bitcoiner theory in all of this?
Which one?
That like fiat was created in World War I, and that like war became a lot more profitable and a lot more attainable. Do you believe in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it certainly helped. I think it helped. It's probably not the end all be all. I mean, there has to be human desire as well, and but it probably made things a lot easier. I think with all these things, people have this intention and they do what they think is right. Like we won World War II, but we still have a war against the Russians, and we need to win against communism, and therefore X, Y, and Z. And what's making us inefficient right now? Well, being on a gold standard is probably making us inefficient. And if we're able to go to this fiat model and print money that allows the flexibility that we did not have otherwise, and that's one efficiency. And then you just keep iterating and iterating and iterating, and suddenly we're in a system that no longer works for us, no longer works for the people, but works extremely well for the original goal, which was create more efficiencies around getting weapons out and waging war and waging battle.
That was the goal. It became the goal, but it wasn't the initial goal. Is your point, right?
Yeah, it wasn't the initial goal. It was a means to that end, though.
Because for the audience, like the theory, I think I would credit Safedine probably for this. The theory is that World War I, like the Bank of England, traditionally the way a nation state would fund a war is you issue a government bond, and then the citizens of the country pledge their gold, pledge their money, their savings to buy the bonds from the government. Like if my government is going to say like, hey, someone's about to drop a bomb on our fucking head and we need to protect ourselves, like here are these bonds, we need all of your savings. So like go tell your friends, tell your family, like go into your savings, whatever you could afford, and give it to us because we're about to get fucking bombed.
Yep.
And that's how war was funded. And so it was very efficient and very peaceful, because if war was unnecessary, like you wouldn't pledge your savings, right? Of course. And so all of a sudden though, in World War I, the Bank of England issued these bonds and no one pledged the money, because the English people were like, why the fuck would we go hurt people right now? This isn't really like our fight to fight. Like we don't necessarily see the angle and like why you're being so aggressive. And so the Bank of England issued credit and bought it themselves. They created money that didn't actually exist, bought it themselves. And what that does is you create money out of thin air, increases the supply of the pound.
Yep.
And then the result of that was like serious inflation. And so all of a sudden, war went from the people needing to believe in it and fund it to the government needing to believe it and just taking the money from the people.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden, as a citizen, whether I think it's a moral, ethical thing to do for my country or not, I'm getting poorer because my government is just borrowing off credit.
100%.
And now my eggs are more expensive and my house is more expensive.
Invisible tax.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden you have this like industrial complex, which then it's a machine, it's a monster. And like, that's why the last century has been the century of war. Who do we want to fight? Who do we want to go and force our wills on?
Yep.
It doesn't matter. And like whether you and I like it or not, like they're just going to take it from me anyway because they can debase the currency I have, right?
Yep.
And so when did Kennedy die?
63.
63.
Yeah, 63.
And then when did we leave the gold standard?
71.
Yeah, I mean, it's all right.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons something like Bitcoin, not even Bitcoin, but like when you have that really, it's a very subtle change, which is that like the money lives within the people and it's because just for the people, sorry, I'm interviewing you, but like, just so people understand, the government can't create gold out of thin air.
Yeah.
Which is a huge property of the money, which is why it was so important.
Yeah,
is
scarce.
that if they couldn't get the gold from the people, then they couldn't get any.
Yeah.
But if you switch it and you're like, well, it's based on pounds and we issue pounds, then whether I like it or not, they're going to take wealth from me by inflating shit. Like take COVID, for example. Actually, here's a question I'll ask you. In March 2020, if the government issued COVID bonds and said, Jack, I need your life savings to rush a vaccine out because there's this thing we don't totally understand. I personally would have been like, I'm not giving you my fucking savings. Like, I can't tell if this is a weird version of the flu or if it's going to kill us all.
Yep.
But like, we should learn more and relax.
Yeah.
But instead, the government created an insane amount of monetary stimulation and just took from me, robbed from me. Now my dream home is 50% more expensive. My eggs are more expensive. My life is more expensive. The dollars that I had in my savings that they could have asked me for now are worth significantly less.
It's no longer voluntary.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's the lack of empathy that you
Yep.
talk about as well, right? Like human empathy is built in that like, no, I want to contribute my life savings to this effort, to this war, to my government, to my country.
It's permissionless, but the wrong kind of permissionless. They don't need your permission to take from you.
Is that what
in
you
this
think
particular case.
happened though? Is that like the Bank of England changed from a Mother Nature, like gold has restrictions based on chemistry, based on Mother Nature, and they flipped it to government credit. Government credit can take from you whether you like it or not. And then you just become on a war path where you're constantly in war. It's profit seeking. And you're under a lot of pressure because you're operating under so much debt and credit.
Yeah.
And then you kill the soul of your country. You think that's what happened?
I think the more we remove ourselves from nature, the worse things get for humans.
What is nature?
Like a natural, like what you just said. Not
Like gold.
Gold is natural. Gold is a natural thing that we can hold, we can touch, we can feel the weight of, and what fiat represents and what that flip represents is an abstraction layer and an indirectness. And when we build abstraction upon abstraction upon abstraction upon abstraction, we eventually lose sight of who we are and what's happening, and maybe that's intentional. I don't think it's necessarily intentional. I think all these things compound, and like I said before, like I think there's momentum that's very hard to stop. But every now and then we have moments where someone says, wait a minute, no, like we need to get back to like a natural principle. We need to get back to we need to remove the layers of abstraction, remove the layers of indirection, and get back to something real. And that's what, to me, Bitcoin was. Satoshi came up with a system that converted electricity into value, and did so in a provable, deterministic way that you could validate with very simple math. And in a digital world, that feels like the most natural approach, meaning that it has the least amount of abstractions and indirection. The financial world right now is full of abstraction. We have the Federal Reserve that sets policy. We have the banks that help influence that policy and also have customers like you and me. We have financial institutions like Visa, MasterCard, Amex, Discover that present networks on top of these policies and these institutions. Each one of those layers has some sort of permission associated with it. But most importantly, we tend to deal with that top level abstraction, and we don't have any permission to really understand what's going on at the lowest layer, why policy is being written the way it is, why it works or doesn't work the way it does, why a government can make a decision to invisibly tax its population and, in your words, like steal money from them through policy that was not, policy that's written by someone who's not elected, that is appointed. That feels dangerous. So Satoshi saying, this, like, wait a minute, let's remove those abstractions, let's remove that indirection, and let's make the policy code that anyone can read, code that anyone can change and write and fork if they disagree with it, and then let the market determine what policy people like. And Bitcoin Core represents the set of policies that at least this small niche of people like, because it's working for them better than the current system. And it may not feel that way. It may not feel like it's working in the United States or so-called Western countries. But if you go to the global South, you go to Central America, you go to South America, you go all over the continent of Africa, there are countries within each one of those continents where it's, Bitcoin is not, and this transparent code-based policy is not desire, it's necessity, because their governments are failing around them, because their inflation is over 70%, because their banks won't allow them to have a bank account, and therefore even participate in the economy. Bitcoin is the only answer for them. And they're not looking at the price. They're looking at it as a way to transmit money, to transmit information, to exchange value from point A to point B. And point A to point B happens to be between themselves and their family who needs the money and doesn't want to pay the 30% or the 15% that like a Western Union would charge, if it's even available in their country. Nigeria banned Western Union recently. So like what Satoshi did was beautiful, and that he was one of those people, or she or they, were one of those people that said, wait a minute, like we just have too many abstractions right now. Let's get back to natural fundamentals. And the natural fundamental in this case is electricity in, computation out, and this concept of proof of work. And that work you did, that electricity you paid for, is proof that you've earned this value, and you can resell the value into the network.
So, okay, I'm going to try and summarize this and break it down. So the government back in World War I, and we're talking about, America, which was initially a set of freedom ideals, starts to lose its track. In the Western world generally, I'm talking about like the Bank of England, but like the idea of the West and like freedom starts to lose its track when the government starts, whether intentionally or unintentionally, stealing from the people. And just for those at home, the way it's like, people may think that sounds insane. Like, fucking Joe Biden's old ass isn't like stealing the money under my mattress. What's happening is if I have $100 and that $100 is worth one carton of eggs, let's say, just clean math. And then all of a sudden he creates so much stimulus and so many more US dollars to do COVID and to fund this and Iraq and all this shit. All of a sudden my $100 that I've worked really hard for is now only worth a fourth of a carton of eggs. And so he's stealing from me by ways of creating more dollars, right? And so the government's ability to divorce from something like gold, but fuck gold, it's divorce from like physical constraints of reality that like cannot be manipulated, cannot be profit seeking driven, right? Like all those things that ended up funding the worst of humanity in an incentive that's very dangerous, and that killing people and war and I mean, I have no idea if the CIA killed JFK, but assassinating your own president
Yep.
was profitable and was helpful and was along with the mission of whatever the, like, whether it's 3-letter agencies or governments or whatever trying to achieve. So if that's all true, so you think like basically the money breaking and it fucked up government incentive and fucked up the way people think about things, like caused a bunch of war and hate and removed human empathy, which is like critically important for society to function healthily.
I think yes, and I would point mainly to the abstractions. Like anytime we abstract ourselves away from what is natural, we lose empathy.
But why are abstractions so dangerous?
I don't think they're inherently dangerous, but like if we're not able to like what's the saying, touch grass?
Yeah.
If we're not able to see through the abstractions and realize what they are for what they are, then you lose sight of what's real and what's not real, right? And like I think they're dangerous in that they can be forgotten and that become one's only reality. And those abstractions can be taken advantage of because by definition, like nature is shared. Nature is constantly iterating. It's not truly owned by any one thing. It does what it needs to do, right? A hurricane, well, you can argue like maybe we're able to create hurricanes right now, but like these are forces of nature that happen in a way that feels somewhat random. And I don't believe anything is necessarily random. There's all this compounding interest and momentum that ends up, resulting in a hurricane. And that can't necessarily be controlled by any one particular individual, because a series of events is in the millions, if not infinite, to make that one thing happen and to make that one thing occur. But when we create abstractions on top of nature, those are man-made. Those are created by us, and they can be controlled by us. And they, single individuals, a group of individuals, can take control of those abstractions, as they have with fiat, I believe, and do things that benefit them or what they believe to be beneficial for the world. And they may have some correct ideas, or it may be incorrect. But the problem is we lose sight of what is actually natural, and we only see like the world of these abstractions, and we have to believe what they're doing with it is right, because not believing in that narrative means that everything is broken, right?
Yeah. Well, is this why you work on Bitcoin? Because I think for a lot of the media or a lot of like people on the internet, people will say Jack works on Bitcoin because he's a monk and he eats 1 meal a day and like all this shit. But
all monks use Bitcoin.
But it hits it, but it hits a little different if you're like, I work on Bitcoin because I'm trying to solve for world peace, and I'm trying to like help the incentives of government and the military industrial complex, and I'm trying to reinstore like empathy and humanity. Like, is that why you work on Bitcoin? Because of all this stuff?
Well, I can't say that like that was the reason I got into Bitcoin. Like when the white paper came out, I was blown away by its simplicity and how powerful it was in that simplicity. I was a big, I when I was a kid, I read alt cypherpunks a lot on Usenet, and this is where a lot of that energy was happening.
Airplane.
CIA. They're already coming.
You think it was something you said?
Was it a black helicopter?
Huh?
Yellow.
Was it a black? Oh, well, okay, we're safe. No, I grew up just being so inspired by the people in alt cypherpunks and the ideas, RQs and Philip Zimmerman, PGP, that whole period of time in the 90s when it was illegal to export cryptography. Adam Back, wrote 3 or 4 lines of Perl code and put it on a T-shirt and sold those T-shirts overseas just to point out how ridiculous that law was. That cryptography should not be considered a munition and beneficial to everyone in the world. That I think was a big turning point for me, and I got into Bitcoin because of those ideals, because that it pointed to a world where an individual had control, and an individual didn't have to deal with abstractions to, in this case, protect their communications. And not that these people were doing things against the law or that needed to be necessarily protected, not that anyone was watching them or interested in their conversations, but there were people in the world, activists all around the world, journalists all around the world, who did need that, who did have people intercepting their communications and spying on them, and did need that protection. And that's who these people were fighting for when they're building the software. And the dream for the alt cypherpunks and the cypherpunk manifesto was money. That was the ultimate holy grail, because it had so many problems associated with it. It had the biggest one being the double spending problem. You have to make sure that money is not spent twice. And the way we've solved that in the past is to have a bank, to have a centralized institution say that this particular piece of bullion or fiat has already been spent. And entire companies grew out of that, like Visa and MasterCard and all the banks, obviously. And that was a very, very hard problem to solve. And Satoshi solved it and did so in a very clever way that enabled people with their own resources to prove that they were able to create this value, and do so in under a policy that was visible through source code, through C++. And seeing that was just like mind-blowing. Like I was just, it was just incredible to bear witness to it. And it was a very, very tiny community. The people that cared about it deeply cared about it, and it became their life. And that circle continued to increase. Now, over time, you start looking at what Satoshi made, and who knows what Satoshi's political leanings were. I mean, you can probably infer, or what Satoshi's ideas around the world were. You can infer some other things. But Satoshi was very, very careful to not lean too heavily in any one particular direction, stayed very on point around code as policy. And as time went on, people came into the space and they brought their own ideals, like the Austrian economist and the libertarians, and this technology, this idea of code as policy, this transparent proof of work system, fitted those theories and fitted that mindset. And as you keep going forward, you look at like this hammer that you have in Bitcoin and all the nails around you, and maybe the issues with the Fed are one such nail, and maybe the military-industrial complex is another such nail. Maybe world peace is another such nail because of X, Y, and Z reasons. So I don't think Bitcoin causes world peace, but I do believe that the ideals behind it, this shared policy, this clear law that can be read by anyone and altered and brought to the market as an alternative for people to decide if they like or not, is really, really important to get to world peace. And I think those ideas and ideals built in and continuing to evolve within Bitcoin are really, really important. So it's not what got me to Bitcoin, but it's certainly what keeps me there.
I was going to say, is Bitcoin like the most important thing, given that context, to be working on? Like, how do we fix? Like, I mean, this is fucked.
Yep.
Like our own government supposedly assassinated one of the best presidents we ever had.
Yep.
And our own government steals from us.
Which is not unique to our government, right? Other governments have assassinated their own presidents. Like we feel it. We feel it differently because it is our country, and it's
I think it's
disappointing.
unique to the betrayal of the ideals, though.
Yes.
I mean, we collectively.
But there have been other countries that have had very strong presidents, some of which Kennedy supported within Africa, that have been assassinated as well. So, I mean, I think this is part of the human condition ultimately. And the question is, how do you prevent that happening in the future? And I think, Kennedy and any president any CEO represent a single point of failure. The weight of the world is ultimately upon them. And I think one of the ideals Bitcoin at least presents, or one of the ideas I should say, is that maybe you don't have a central single point of failure. Maybe you have many. Maybe you have millions, and these disperse into much smaller communities, and they're more this idea of like hyper local and building for the community or the quote unquote tribe around me, and that this technology actually scales extremely well for that. And you can build these small circular economies, which are not at the mercy of a government that's thousands of miles away and has no context for the problems that you and your community are facing, and just practically cannot care about it because it's got so much else going on. It's way too abstracted from your own reality, and you have no power whatsoever to fix it in that mindset. So I do think Bitcoin, helps. It gives a tool to enable that. It gives one such tool. I think Nostr is another tool. I think there's a new messaging client I'm really fascinated by called you can pronounce it as Simplex or SimpleX, but it's another such decentralized. That's what people think of. It's not the best name.
They should change the name.
Maybe
you're obsessed with herpes.
He's very focused on this being the right name, but I do think that challenges even like Signal. I think is a great iteration in privacy and security, but it does have centralized aspects to it, whereas this new thing Simplex questions those again and breaks them down, I think in the right way. So the thread between all these things, to answer your question, is this the most important thing to work on? I think the most important thing to work on for me in my life and what I want to see is that we're building technologies that shift the balance of power back to the individual. And whatever shifts the power of balance, the balance of power back to the individual, I'm signing up for. And that can be in money, that can be in media, which Nostr represents, that can be in private messaging, which Simplex represents.
Let's fucking go.
And I also believe that for me in my life right now, it's important that I don't need to start the thing. I don't need to own the thing. I don't need to benefit from it from a value perspective. I need to support it. Like, that's the phase of my life I'm in. And I need to find as many of these projects as possible with these ideals. And I hope there are thousands of them. And I need to support it in every way I can. And the reason why is because Satoshi taught me something. Satoshi taught me that just this concept of Satoshi walking away and not touching their Bitcoin, not, as far as we can tell, benefiting from it from a value perspective in any way. Walking away at the onset of WikiLeaks using it, which would tell you some things about why they may have walked away. But the fact that someone could do that and create this masterpiece under a pseudonym when our entire society is built around ego and fame and number of views you get, number of impressions you get, the number of followers you have, and building up a brand and maintaining that brand and to choose a pseudonym, to never reveal your identity, to walk away from your project and let a community take it over and persist and make it better, to the degree that if Satoshi was unveiled today and came back, he would not be seen as the lead. He could ask questions and make statements, but like that's the resilience of what this person built. Like truly built something bigger than themselves without any ego in it. And that is so rare. How many times are you aware of that has happened?
I'm only 29.
Like name them.
So 0.
But throughout all of history.
No, but I also like don't think people generally appreciate like a lot of the Silicon Valley. Like I want to talk about like Twitter and like all of the shit in San Francisco and stuff. But I just don't think people appreciate this broader context of like, oh man, if you zoom out a second, humanity got really, really dark around the world wars, where all of a sudden we went from money that was issued by Mother Nature to money that was issued by government, which kind of fucks us up in the head so bad that we just start going to war all the time and profit seeking. And you have these big monopolistic corporations that live on these abstracted layers, and you have financial inclusion problems and extreme levels of poverty and assassinations and anger, and that this technology is trying to take the money that was once with the people and restore it back. Because the problem with gold is that it's a fucking piece of metal. And so we can use technology to just make it a little bit better.
More convenient.
Totally. So, but like, if people understand that, then like, not only like, why would you be upset with Bitcoin or not be a fan of Bitcoin?
Are people upset with Bitcoin?
I think so. You don't think so?
I think there's, I don't know if they're upset with Bitcoin. I think they're probably upset with, maybe the some of the people behind it that they don't like or don't agree with.
Like, would it like so?
Like generally, I'm just saying as like a generality. Like there's a stereotype for a Bitcoin person, and that I think has been co-opted, unfortunately, by the Ethereum set and the altcoins and like everything that happened over the past 2 years, and Bitcoin unfortunately has been put in that bucket. And people, the random person on the street has a very particular stereotype and idea around who likes crypto and what type of person that is. And Bitcoin is unfortunately in that basket. I don't think it will always be in that basket. It's only in that basket in Western countries. It's not in that basket in the global South, and Central America, South America, and Africa. But it is in that basket, and I think it's a hurdle for it to overcome. And I think people are angry at that the idea, and then they find all the reasons to be mad at it, such as the environmental impact and
let's get into this. So wait, I want to ask you a quick question. If the CIA felt, and like, I don't know, like this is my first ever podcast, like I don't know if I'm gonna get fucking canceled already, but if the CIA supposedly killed our president, which destroyed the soul of our country because he was that threatening to everything we just described of like this profit-seeking, war, credit-based thing that was like this monster. Like, do you get worried that the CIA is going to kill you? Or like...
it doesn't matter. Like if the
CIA kills you?
It wouldn't matter.
I'd be sad.
No, I mean... I mean to the ideals that we're building on. That's the power of Bitcoin is like... And things like Nostr and these open protocols is that it doesn't matter if any one individual is taken out. You have to take out all the nodes.
Totally.
You take out all the nodes, all the people associated with it, and then you truly get it. And that's what makes it powerful. So the target, me as a target, becomes far less interesting because taking me out or you out because they see Bitcoin as a threat and you a leader in Bitcoin actually doesn't impact Bitcoin whatsoever. I'm sorry, but it doesn't. And if I die tomorrow or if I'm assassinated tomorrow, like Bitcoin moves on.
Yeah.
And as it should. Like it does not impact Bitcoin at all. And that's a beautiful thing for humanity. It's not beautiful for me, maybe. It depends on what's on the other side, I guess.
Do you get nervous about that shit?
No,
ever?
I don't think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I just like you can't live your life thinking about that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Well, I think an interesting juxtaposition then is that with the CIA potentially assassinating JFK, policy momentum ideas also died with him. The reversal of the
Yeah.
idea to go back to war. But for all intents and purposes, the CIA may or may not have already assassinated Satoshi or that person, that group of people, but the idea is still
It doesn't matter. Yeah,
flourish,
exactly.
propagate.
Because the idea is in code.
We're
and
here talking about it, still building on
Yeah.
it, right?
The idea is in code, and it will. You can't delete that. Like you just can't. You can't cancel it. You can't delete it. You can't remove it from the world. The idea is out there, and even if all the code in all the repositories for Bitcoin were removed, people have enough of the idea to recreate it, and maybe it's the ultimate refactor. But like they may create it in a better way based on everything that was learned, and I think that is the ultimate power of this idea and how it manifests as a technology.
So at this point, it can't be stopped.
Let's see. I mean, can it be stopped? I think the greatest risk to Bitcoin is irrelevance. And it becomes increasingly irrelevant if, like, like Jack and you and, your company stop deciding to make it accessible to people and stop showing people the utility of it. If it ends up being an asset like gold, it's just one more commodity that people trade, and it's lost all of its potential, in my view, because that is not what it is to me. It's not a trade. It's, it is truly an idea around, fixing the currency and fixing the way we exchange value, and doing so in a way that the individual owns and they can make their own decisions around. So, like, its greatest challenge and what can stop it to me is irrelevance, and that's just core developers. They don't want to work on it anymore because there's something more exciting. They can make more money on Ethereum. They can make more money starting their own altcoin. They can Jack decides that Strike isn't working out or it's not interesting. He wants to work on AI, so he goes to work on AI, and I decided like this Bitcoin thing is bullshit, and I'm bored, and I want to go off, and I want to be a monk now, and I want to go up in the Himalayas and meditate on how much of my life I wasted talking about Bitcoin. The irrelevance is real, like that, and that can happen, and it can compound very quickly. So, and if people like us don't care about it and don't continue to build for it, then it doesn't become relevant to people around the world because it's not accessible to them, and then they don't, they're not able to feel that the power it brings. And
yeah, but I think like that's a great spot to be, because its relevance has a correlation to its importance. Like, I think if the CIA and the government was like, yep, we did it, we killed Kennedy, and we're going back on a gold standard because we realized that we like accidentally just like inflated all of our citizens into poverty and started murdering people, then yeah, Bitcoin would probably become less interesting to folks, right? Yeah. Do you guys know this concept, the house on a hill?
maybe. No.
It's like, I don't know, like a house on like a perfect grassy hill, like the dream. It's like
White
the dream
picket
ideals.
fence.
Yeah, white picket fence, sun, dandelions. Like, to me, America was always the house on the hill. And like, even the way people talk about it, like you migrate, you like leave whatever you are to go to the house on the hill, and it has freedom, it has equality, the American dream. Like, what the fuck is the American dream? But it's all of these things are just like ideals. I think Bitcoin is the new house on the hill. When I hear you talk about like the death of the empire and like America dying, is that like,
I don't think America's dying, just to be clear. I think the idea, it's the end of an empire, and the empire mindset. I think that is beneficial to America and the idea of America. We don't need to be an empire. Like, we can be a strong, solid country that is in economic strength and the greatest in the world at innovation and building things that people truly want, and growth from that without threatening people with military.
yeah, I think Bitcoin is the new America in the set of ideals. and it's a superior one,
Yep.
which isn't like, it's not like I'm not talking shit about America. It's just America was this startup, I
Yeah.
think, that tried to inspire the world towards awesome ideals with good founding fathers. And I think Bitcoin is just superior technology at implementing those ideals. Because yeah, like you can't assassinate anybody or misconstrue. Yeah. Well, then what about all the alternative cryptos? You talked about it. Because like for me, like, and hopefully fucking Mark Andreessen and all these guys watch this, because if you think that Bitcoin is really trying to solve things like, and not directly like you said, but try and help world peace, poverty, hyperinflation in emerging markets, really like anger and help restore empathy, then for people to like work on Dogecoin, it's like more than just like, oh, you're interested in that and I'm interested in this. To me, that's like, fuck you.
Yep.
Like, dude, we're like trying to solve real shit here.
Yeah.
Because if America loses its track, isn't focused, isn't able to self-reflect and listen to someone like Kennedy and be inspired by it, being curious, and China and Russia, like that, like Bitcoin as something else that has a better chance at embodying freedom ideals, and for you to come along in a self-interested way, kind of like the war industrial complex type of way, like get muddy the waters and distract people and confuse people, arguably intentionally, like it gets me really upset. Like, but do you feel the same way? How do you think about all of that shit? Like, you know, Elon bought Twitter and put fucking Dogecoin on it. What the fuck?
Yep. Although it was funny that all the Bitcoin maxis had to see that logo for a few days. I thought that was the most hilarious thing. Look, I mean, Elon is obviously working on problems that he believes are beneficial to humanity, electric cars and sending people to Mars and now Twitter. And I think Doge, in that sense, just give him the benefit of the doubt, probably represents fun and diversion, and some like people need to like stress relief and like jokes, and I think that's more or less what it represents. He's a believer in Bitcoin. Obviously, he had his companies buy it. He owns it. I don't think he's ever personally sold his Bitcoin. I think he was fairly early in it. I think he understands the principles of it. I think he follows some of those principles in his companies. But he has questions about it around the speed. I don't think he was fully aware of Lightning and layer 2 approaches. I think there's a lot of, in various phases, there's a lot of hype around all these things. And I think he's attracted to something that feels more whimsical and fun and whatnot. That said, like, I do think that distraction is dangerous. Like, I think people lose money because of what he says and, his excitement. They buy into something like Dogecoin and the next day it falls. And I don't believe it has any real fundamentals. I mean, it was literally started as a joke. And if you're not treating it as that and as a diversion, then there's issues there. For the rest of them, the altcoins, I mean, I think there's probably some that started with the right ideals. Like there's some more
like what?
Like more privacy focused coins, and like they saw problems with Bitcoin in terms of privacy, and some saw problems in terms of security. And I don't know why Ethereum started, but it was an offshoot of Bitcoin and a fork in ways. And I think it's the thing is, like, it's unfortunate that all these things are labeled. They were all labeled cryptocurrency, and then they just dropped the currency part and just labeled crypto. And like, to me, Bitcoin has always been about the currency part. And I don't know of any other project that has the attributes that we need in a currency. Like, you don't have that in Ethereum. You don't have any of these things in any of these other coins. The Bitcoin is what it is. It's deliberate in its decision, which means it's slow to evolve, very slow. But don't you want that for your money?
Of
Do you want
course.
something that moves super fast and like,
Well, I think these things, like, if you further abstract the definition, then they can kind of live cozily in this like idea of crypto. If you're like, cryptocurrency was an innovation that was designed to remove financial abstractions and give humans, individuals, bare instrument back
Yep.
that they store, then all of a sudden, like, all these other things would be like, oh, well, I'm not that. I'm not a cryptocurrency. But if you like, you further abstract, if you just remove fucking letters from the definition,
Yeah.
then it like broadens the scope of like, oh, you don't necessarily have to be a currency. You don't necessarily have to do proof of work.
Yep.
You don't necessarily have to do anything that was core to the reason and the broader problem,
Yep.
so that you can live in this like perpetual hype cycle and just take advantage of people. That's my opinion. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but okay. So
Yeah,
then,
and there is that, like, there is that behavior. Like, people are definitely doing that.
okay, well,
So-
let's talk about that. Like Coinbase.
Yeah.
So first of all, do you have beef with Mark Andreessen? Is that beef real?
Yeah, I would say.
Yeah.
I would say it's real. I would say, I wish, obviously we owe Mark a lot. Like, I wouldn't have a business. We wouldn't have Twitter. We wouldn't have Block and Square without Mark's contributions. He created the web browser.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that was the first real abstraction layer on the internet that allowed it to be usable.
Totally.
And, he's one of the people that every time you see a URL now, a domain, anywhere in the world, it's because of that team. That team did that. And that's really, really powerful. And I wish just, I think he got trapped into this Web3 thing. And I think it's not just him, it's a lot of VCs. There's a whole class of them that hype in an unbelievable way these technologies that have no real principles behind them and no fundamentals, and are extremely trendy. And the whole technology field is extremely trendy. I mean, just 6 months ago, maybe 9 months ago, we were talking about Bored Apes and how this whole universe would be created around these Bored Apes. And now you don't hear them once. All you hear is how AI is going to kill us all. And it literally, like, 9 months ago, like, that's how trendy this industry is. And I think Mark and others have felt victim to some of the trends, and they just hop to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. And I would just hope and want and desire that, like, someone like him, who saw something so powerful on the internet back in the day, could see something so powerful in Bitcoin and fund development, fund open source development around it, and make it better, and build companies around it too, of course. Or tell us why you're not doing that, instead of doing something that is, to me, offensive, which is the Web3 world. Like, it's very hard as an individual person in this world, again, because of all these abstractions, and Web3 was like the ultimate abstraction, to know what's real. And I'm putting my hard-earned money into this thing, and then it goes away. And, like, there's what is that? Like, why? And why are you investing in things like that? And I'm not saying that they invested directly in rug pulls, but certainly there had to be a few. And certainly they invested in platforms that enable that. And I want better from the people, like, I'm very grateful for. Like, he did something that I'm grateful for, and I'll never forget that. But, like, I think there's a better version inside, and I think he could be such a powerful force for things like Bitcoin, and we need the help. We need the help, and I don't think there's any other technology that with the exception of Nostr, that, like, truly betters the world in a more impactful way, because a VC doesn't own it, because a single person in a company doesn't own it, and because a government doesn't own it. And I think he saw that with the web early on, even though he was working for a company in Netscape. And I think he appreciates those ideals. And I would want him to dedicate some significant percentage of his portfolio to funding those.
And
maybe he does. I don't know. I don't know. But
then
it's not apparent to me.
What's the beef? Like, I guess, do you, like,
There's that. I
Do you
mean,
have an
it's that
issue-
it's around Web3 and like
Yeah.
I just don't think that I don't think those technologies were authentic, and I don't think the investment
Yeah.
methodology was authentic. And again, I can only say all this from an outside perspective,
Totally.
and I come at it with a bias, and my bias is towards like building something like a Bitcoin because of its principles, and being first principled and really thinking through all the aspects. But I'm incentivized by that, and by building an ecosystem around it, which my company will ultimately benefit from and doesn't have to own. And that was the web to me. Like, no one owns the web. You could argue with that, given that we are dependent upon Googles of the world and Twitters and Facebook, that they own the entryway, but they don't truly own the web. They don't truly own the internet. Anyone can come and disrupt that, and it will be disrupted. Nostr will do that. Bitcoin is doing that right now. And there will be other technologies that do the same. So I would just want him, the beef is around like, Mark, like, help us out.
Yeah, well,
help us out with that. We need the help.
I mean, this is a lot of the reason I'm doing this show. Is I think you're right. I think Bitcoin's relevance is super important. And like, I've never met Mark. So he could be like the sweetest guy ever, and I could have a total misunderstanding. But like, I would hope Mark, you should like let me fly out and host you on the show, because like, it's frustrating to have like a technology that helps reinstore fundamental freedoms and human properties. And then
and maybe he doesn't disagree with that. Maybe he disagrees with that this technology does that, but that should be the conversation. Like, I want to hear his reasons why.
100%. Like, you know, CNBC is not like, we're hosting this guest to talk about how Bitcoin maybe doesn't actually fix all of these broad stroke issues with society. It's like, this guest created some fucking coin that they'd prefer you buy than Bitcoin because they created a bunch for themselves. And like, Mark contributes to that, and it really dilutes the messaging and the relevance of Bitcoin. You know, like, can you imagine if America was like, hey, we build tools, we fight for freedom, we're brave, we're courageous, and we've been blessed with a new technology, and we're going to rally behind it in the face of the CCP and in the face of Russia and in the face of all of these things. And we're going to fight for freedom through this thing that we don't own, but we believe in. That is very American. And so it's just fucking annoying. So anyway, Mark, you should come on the show. Can I ask, like, how does beef like that work? Like, you have beef with Zuck too? Like, how does that work? You actually like DM with these, like, is it like beef like rappers? Like, you guys like DM, or like,
is that what they do?
I don't know. I'm asking you. Like, I don't have, like, I'm not a big, I don't know.
The way it manifests for me, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily label it as a beef. Like, I have disagreements with approaches. And Mark in particular, early on in Twitter's life, said publicly that we were a clown car that fell into a gold mine.
What? Why do you say that?
Because I think what he meant by it was that we discovered gold by accident. We didn't like come up with it. Like, we had no skill. We were clowns, and we just fell into this discovery, and it was a gold mine, and that happens once every blue moon, right? And there's a lot of people in the world now that think I'm a clown, so he may have been right. And it certainly was a gold mine. And I do believe that Twitter wasn't invented. I don't think any of these things are invented. I think they are discovered. I think you pull one thread and you keep pulling it, and you work on something, and then like you see something you weren't expecting, and that becomes the thing. And there was something in Twitter that we weren't expecting. Like, I started working on this thing. We had a prototype in 2 weeks. It was me and one other engineer. We started using it. We had the idea of like, I could be anywhere with my T9 keyboard phone, my little Nokia, and I could SMS text this service, and it would go out to all the friends that followed my updates, and that was it. Like, it was just like this almost alert system. It was I was a heavy user of LiveJournal back at that time, and also AOL Instant Messenger and the status feature of AOL Instant Messenger, and it was the mashup of those ideas. And all things are mashups of different ideas, right? Everything is. But then the people taught us what they wanted Twitter to be. And that was the magic of Twitter. And they did it in a few ways. One, we had an API that was effectively internal. It let people do anything they wanted. And it enabled a person who was just learning how to program and was 13 years old to write 4 lines of code, and I could buzz the phone in his pocket. I could be on my laptop, on my computer, and I could buzz the phone in his pocket. I could cause a physical vibration, and that feels amazing to a programmer. Like, I can actually, my code manifests into something real. That feels amazing. And that was a hook for Twitter and developers, and that just took off, and they built all these clients and built all these things that we didn't think of. But the real innovation came from the people using the 140 characters in a way they wanted to. And the lead designer for Cash App, and the guy who helped me create the company name for Square and the logo and all of our initial design, Robert Anderson, he and his brother were on Twitter in the early days, and Robert actually built a client for Twitter, and Buzz, his brother, was building a different client for Twitter, and he used this @ symbol. He said @Buzz. What are you doing tonight? Or something to that effect. And then Buzz actually responded in the same syntax. And then we started seeing that syntax more and more, and we thought it was the ugliest thing in the world. Like, it was just so ugly, like this @ symbol in front of a name. But eventually it became a thing. Like, people were, and you look at what people are doing, they're not just like using a syntax, they're referencing one another. They actually want to have a conversation. We didn't build this for conversation. We didn't build it for replies. They wanted to have a conversation with one another. And then I took my laptop. I went to this cafe in Hayes Valley in San Francisco called Stacks. It took 3 hours. I wrote the code to recognize when there's an @ symbol and see if we have a name behind it that corresponds to one of the people that person follows. And then I created this tab called the Replies tab, which is now Mentions. And suddenly Twitter became a platform for conversation. And we saw the same thing with this weird little symbol that we know as a hashtag or a pound. And people put a keyword behind that. And this was Chris Messina. And he started tagging. This came from Flickr before that, and probably another service before Flickr. But he started tagging his tweets, and we found this company that was using our API that was recognizing those hashtags and the keywords after it. And when you tapped on it, it would do a search of all the tweets ever. And it would show you all the tweets tagged with that. And what was most interesting is that it did a reverse search, in that it started recognizing a high velocity of these similar keywords, and it would present trends. We never thought of trends. We never invented trends, but that became a defining aspect to our platform, to what Twitter is. And then Tim O'Reilly of O'Reilly Book Publishing started using this RT, and would copy and paste a tweet from someone he followed. And that was retweeting someone that he followed that other people may not follow, a tweet that he found interesting. And sometimes you would add a comment, which was quote retweeting. And we just made that easier. We just built that as a convenience. It's one button instead of typing it out. So I agree that, like, we fell into this because we observed. We were really good observers of what people wanted to do with it. And I don't think the same was true necessarily of Facebook's approach. I think they have a very, very strong point of view on what they want the world to be and what they want it to look like. And they execute like crazy, and they're amazing executors. They're just like incredible operators, to the point of like the contrast of the clown car, right? Like, we were the clown car, they were the they were
War
the
industrial complex.
They were the tank. Yeah, they were the like highly regimented, precise Lamborghini, I guess.
Zuck killed JFK.
The orange Lamborghini.
Well, do you agree with their like, what's the beef then outside of like him? That I mean, it sounds like he was just being a dick. I actually don't know when he said that, but like, outside of that comment, like, do you agree with? Because one of the questions I want to ask you is
I disagree with it. I mean, I disagree with the approach, but I appreciate that different approaches are out there. But part of this ends up becoming like just back to that diversion point. It becomes fun. Like there's so much stress in the world that like I want to have like some banter with Mark.
Yeah.
Even though he's probably not paying attention to any of it, like I'm gonna call the guy out because like I don't agree with this particular approach, and some of that benefits me. Some of it I believe benefits humanity. Some of it maybe not. Some of it's just like completely useless and shame on me. But I don't know. It becomes a fun thing, and like I think all these beefs ultimately become fun over time. Just because they're like, look at what's happening now. Like Elon has the exact same beef with Mark and Facebook and WhatsApp, and now they're going into a cage match in the Vegas Octagon. So
what's the line on that?
I don't know.
I think it was. I think it's Zuck plus 300.
Yeah, I mean he's much smaller, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Elon
but
minus 500.
he's been training. I mean,
Zuck looks
he's
like
a different person,
feisty motherfucker.
and I appreciate about that about him. I've made fun of it in the past. Like he does, one of my first dinners with him, he served me raw goat that he killed in his backyard, and because he does these personal challenges every year, and it felt very abnormal to me at the time, but I understand it now, and I appreciate that every year he takes on a different challenge, and it just happens to be the case now that he's doing this MMA fighting, and I think before is surfing and foiling, and
one of the challenges one year was to grow a goat and slaughter it and feed it to you.
No, his challenge was to only eat things that he himself killed. Again, I think to get rid of that abstraction layer.
Do you think Zuck likes Bitcoin?
Do I think he likes Bitcoin? I think I don't know. I believe he probably would, the soul of him would appreciate the principles behind it, but obviously he started Libra and what was the first name?
DM.
Or that was the second, yeah. So Libra was the first name, DM was the second name?
No.
Anyway, he believed...
Novi.
Obviously he believed in the power of it, that he had to own it himself. And I do think Mark's failure in personality, which is fixable, and I think he's fixing it. And I give him huge props for what I see as a major fix in terms of open sourcing AI and his AI work. Huge change from what I perceived him to be, which is like, I need to own the thing. Bitcoin is amazing. I need to own that thing. It needs to be my, like the Zuckbuck thing. And I don't think he ever wanted Zuckbucks, but he certainly wanted to own that currency because it made business sense for them. For them to provide a currency, which I think was the idea, to provide a currency to people all over Africa that was cost effective and easy for them, got people into the Facebook ecosystem. It got people to Instagram, got people to WhatsApp, it makes complete rational business sense. It's rational and it's the right thing for Facebook, but not right for those people and not right for the world. So that's my disagreement. And I believe he's starting to see that. At least the actions are demonstrating that with the approach to AI. And I'm gonna cheer that on. Like anything that happened in the past, like someone's ability to change and admit mistakes and go a different direction. Like I respect that deeply, and I'm gonna cheer that. And I'll be his biggest supporter.
Yeah.
If he continues to go down that route.
Hearing you tell the Twitter story, which by the way is like so cool.
Can I get another water, please?
What about that one?
That one works, yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're very welcome. Hearing you tell the Twitter story and how Twitter doesn't own the web, you view the web as this distributed thing that allows us all to communicate that nobody owns theoretically and everyone has access to. And you ended up building the public park for conversation, right? Is that how you would describe kind of this iteration towards what Twitter became? Is like the public conversation?
Yeah, I mean, that was our mission statement, was to serve the public conversation. And you break that down, it's like we have a bunch of servers that offer up and present a public conversation. And we wanted it to be the public conversation. I don't believe any one company should own the public conversation.
Totally.
Which is why I believe in protocols such as Nostr. And I believe Twitter would benefit greatly from building on top of Nostr because it takes a bunch of liability away from them. So my ideals around like building the public square and building for the public conversation and truly serving the public conversation no longer ends at a company. A company can be one part of it. A company can be built on top of it. But Twitter is unique, like many of these companies, like Facebook and Google and TikTok, in that it owns the storage, the presentation layer, the discovery layer, and the distribution, all in one stack. And I just don't think that is correct anymore. I don't think that's right for humanity. I don't think that's right for the world. I think if you look at the internet before Google, like the web, the internet was truly decentralized. Look at the technologies we were using. IRC, completely decentralized. Usenet, completely decentralized. Email, entirely decentralized. The web, entirely decentralized. Gopher, these are all completely decentralized. What's the problem with decentralized technology?
What, it's hard to make money?
That's one, but the real problem is discovery. How do I find what I'm looking for? How do I find what I'm looking for on the web? How do I find what I'm looking for on Gopher? How do I find what I'm looking for in IRC to find the right channels? How do I make sense of all these emails I'm getting? Thus, Google, organizing the world's information, solving the discovery problem. And by its very nature at the time, the discovery problem had to be centralized. And that's when the internet shifted. And it shifted to big tech. Because Google, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Pinterest, all these things, at their core, they're just solving the discovery problem. It's the algorithm, right? Today, the world is different. We have technology to solve the discovery problem in a decentralized way. And for proof of that, look at the block explorers on top of Bitcoin. There's I don't know if you're aware of this, but during the Me Too movement, went to every single country. It also went to China. The Chinese government immediately shut down a bunch of these stories from these women. What did the women do? They wrote their stories onto the Bitcoin blockchain, and they taught people, other women, how to read those stories from the Bitcoin blockchain. So very interesting, and that could not have been censored by the Chinese government. So it's interesting how people always find a way with these technologies. And I just think there's better answers to this discovery problem that are truly decentralized. And when I say decentralized, it's again moving the balance of power back to the individual, or to the individual. Maybe it's never been with the individual, but to the individual. And I don't believe like that we need these centralized entities anymore to solve for discovery. I think there's other approaches, and I'm excited to see those. And I think these companies can coexist in that world. And I think they can build phenomenal businesses on top of it, because they can compete in discovery, and they can compete in experience and execution. But the fact that we all use the same protocol, I mean, it's like you and me. Some would say we're competitors, and it's interesting that we're working on this common protocol, this common carrier, in that everything I do for Bitcoin with my company, everything my company does, I think benefits you.
Does.
And everything that you do with your company for Bitcoin, for self-interested reasons, and also for Bitcoin, benefits me. And that's a very, very unique model. And I think you can extend that model to social media and to all media. And I think you can extend that model to private communication, like what Simplex is trying to do. So Like, that's fascinating. We can actually get back to the early ideals of the internet, which are truly fundamentally decentralized. As long, and there's, you know, there's centralized forces like domain names, obviously, are a centralized capture and can compromise the decentralized nature of the internet. And servers and telecommunication providers, all these things can be centralized forces, but it's so distributed right now that it's hard to put back in the bottle, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, based on our conversation, I think not only the early days of the internet, but the like early days of America, or the early days of like the Western world freedoms and stuff like all this. So
It was much more decentralized. Yeah.
yeah, well, it was just like much more like the individual had the power of expression.
Yep.
Which like really does a good job. Like the free market then does a really good job at like brokering truth, right? But okay, I'm trying to find a way to ask this question because I see like in Mark maybe working on trendy technology, Mark Andreessen A16Z, and like Zuck and some of the energy you're describing. Like, because theoretically Mark wants the same things we want, which is like technology to be superior, be innovative, and help the world.
Mm-hmm.
And in this Bitcoin,
They say they do.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll get back to that in a second. And also, Twitter, Google, Facebook, like you're referencing these companies that had to solve the discovery problem. But you guys seemingly, if I didn't know any better, are on the same team, is like where my confusion lies. Is it like Mark is on the same team, Zuck was on the same team as you? Is like, here's this web thing. The more the web grows, the more we all benefit. And you're indexing the public conversation like through this Twitter way, which to me is entirely different. It like Twitter indexes on, like you just said, hashtags, like the conversation on Twitter is very different. Facebook is a digital map of your existing like relationships and world.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but like there was not this same team type of attitude in the same way that like supposedly like our own government and our own president weren't on the same team where they fucking killed the guy. So like, how do you like, am I making any sense? Like, is that rhyme at all? Like,
yeah,
what?
but I don't think that like Facebook doing something beneficial to Facebook does not benefit Twitter or Reddit.
Why? Why did it become
Because
that way?
we're not necessarily working on why did it become that way?
Yeah.
Because it's not a shared, like, I don't think it's a shared protocol that it's far too abstract in a sense. Like, yes, we're working on the shared protocol of TCP/IP. Yes, we're working on the shared protocol of HTTP and other related technologies. But from a business standpoint, a Facebook isn't necessarily incentivized to improve HTTP for everyone. It's only for themselves usually. Whereas with Bitcoin, I think it's like it's the only way to live on Bitcoin is to have that approach, because there is no, like, there's no standards body with Bitcoin, right? There's no committee. You could argue there's Bitcoin Core and there is some valid concern there, but like they operate with this like this very interesting consensus model that is kept in check by the people that run nodes and is also kept in check by the miners.
Mm-hmm.
So even if the developers went rogue, Bitcoin Core went rogue, you still have two other parties that have to reach consensus on where Bitcoin goes.
Mm-hmm.
And you contrast that with the rest of the internet. There's a standards body in the W3C that is comprised of companies like Apple, Google, Facebook, all the big ones, and then some scientists and some researchers and some independents and Tim Berners-Lee, and they make decisions for the entire web. And they are well-considered decisions, but that's a very different model than what Bitcoin has presented. And I think that difference in model is what allows us, who are on the superficial layer competitors to be on the same team, truly on the same team.
Totally.
And that anything we do for our companies in regard to Bitcoin actually benefits the other one. So it really changes your mind around, what is competition, and what we're all trying to do here. And I really appreciate that mindset. Like I haven't experienced that ever. I came from a world that was, it's cutthroat competition. It's, you have to kill your competitor. And I think Facebook to me and Microsoft and Microsoft operated that way. Like we need to dominate and kill everyone. And Google was unique in that they were like the first truly internet company. They contributed a lot to these protocols that they used. I think they've shifted a little bit maybe as they got older and maybe moved away from that. I think they've always had that open source ethos about them, and that's the Google I love. And I hope they get back to it. Like that's what was interesting is like Facebook is now the open source around AI, and that's what they're going to be known for. And you've got this company OpenAI that's not open at all, and you've got Google, who is going to, it will definitely be a dominant force. And OpenAI only exists because of the open research work that Google gave to the world.
Yeah.
And I would just want them to like go back to that in the same way that I would want the marks to help us with Bitcoin, help us with these open protocols. And like it seems like Facebook is doing this Twitter clone that's based on Mastodon, which I don't think has the decentralized principles that we need. I hope they consider like a Noster instead. And I would have so much praise for Mark if he were to take a significant and considerate look at, or I guess it's Adam, I'm sorry, at Noster and what that means to build, if they truly want something decentralized, that they can truly build a phenomenal business on top of. That's the technology they would use, because Mastodon has a bunch of problems in it being decentralized, because it's not. It's a centralized entity.
Yeah. I mean, because through this whole conversation, like and maybe I'm just really biased because we're in the middle of it, but like what rhymes to me is like we first talk about America and the profit-seeking nature of things like printing money, things like going to war.
Yep.
And then you have the profit-seeking nature of venture capital and trendy tech. And then you have the profit-seeking nature of those that built on the web and people like Facebook, Twitter, which you admitted to, Google. So like, do you blame, like one of the reasons humans became the king of the jungle is because our ability to act in a self-interested, the only like responsibility you're born with is to be self-interested in yourself. Yep. And that's the reason, right? So like, I guess I don't blame people for being profit-seeking, because can you imagine a world where we didn't care to keep ourselves alive and innovate, right? But like, so do you, I guess...
Well, they're self-interested for themselves and their family, right? And who they cared for.
Yeah, like...
and their tribe. And I guess to your point, the thread I think you're trying to weave is, I believe that the profit incentive is correct, but it has to be aligned with the benefit of people. And I think with Bitcoin, there's a natural alignment.
Got it.
That anything I do to profit from Bitcoin actually benefits everyone who uses Bitcoin.
Totally.
In a similar way.
My mind is a little blown. Like to me, like we just went through the last 100 years. There's like just a fundamental flaw in like societal incentives and like where the power structure lies. But all this shit sounds the same.
Maybe not. Maybe it is a flaw. Maybe it's become a flaw. But I think there's a momentum that naturally happens, and we've built abstraction upon abstraction upon abstraction, and we haven't taken enough time to reconsider, step back, and really understand our strengths and understand what's important, and to remove some of these abstractions. And Satoshi is one of the people that did that. and for that I'm forever grateful.
Yeah.
And we need more people that have the courage to do that.
Can we double click on one point, because I just think it has the potential to be taken out of context, but you, whether as an individual or an entity profiting from Bitcoin, is actually net beneficial for the users of Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Can you break that down a little? Like, how, as a user, I use Bitcoin. How does you making money off that benefit me?
If I build a profitable business, like we've built an exchange for Bitcoin, and it generates a significant amount of money, and we utilize that to expand our efforts into Bitcoin. So number one, the fact that anyone in the United States can quickly and easily buy Bitcoin, and as more people buy it, the more valuable it becomes, and as more people find it relevant, the more valuable it becomes. The more companies like ours who find it relevant and take risks and on top of it as public companies to build for it, the more valuable it becomes. And we reinvest the money that we make off Bitcoin into things like our BitKey, which is our non-custodial hardware wallet, which means that you can buy, and we hope this happens, we buy Bitcoin on Cash App and you immediately shift it to your own custodial where you control at least two of the keys. We can help you with the third if you want, security, or you can take all three keys and just...
The money's with the individual.
And you are your own bank, so to speak, and it helps us build that. And we're building a mining rig. And if we can make miners more efficient, then the value of Bitcoin increases. If we can decentralize mining, that's one of my biggest concerns right now with Bitcoin, is it's centralizing into a few large miners and a few large mining pools. If we can decentralize it, if we can build a space heater that mines Bitcoin and pays for its own electricity, and people all over America and all around the world in colder climates can use a space heater that pays for its own electricity, and instead of having 2 or 3 major miners, we have millions of miners. That decentralizes the network and provides more security for the network. And we need those miners to validate the transactions, not just to mine the coins, but to validate the transactions. So anything that we do and we'll make profit from selling those miners.
Yep.
We'll make profit from selling those wallets, the hardware wallet. But the more people that have their non-custodial Bitcoin, and the more people that have their own at-home miner, and the more people that run their own node, like we may build a node into the miner as well, that further decentralizes Bitcoin, removes single points of failure, removes vectors of attack, and maintains and increases the value of Bitcoin. So it's a very interesting model I just haven't seen elsewhere. Like that direct sort of comeback. You can build very, very profitable businesses as an individual or as a collection of individuals like our companies, and still benefit an individual that's not even your customer, that just happens to use the same protocol that you're using. That's amazing. Like, just think about that.
Yeah, and just an also interesting juxtaposition, because for something like, as a user of Facebook, I've never directly profited from that product personally.
You can't in that model. You can't.
Yeah, exactly.
In YouTube, like, you can be a YouTube creator and you can, earn a bunch of money from, revenue splits with advertising. OnlyFans is another model where like people are earning a bunch of money.
You have an OnlyFans?
I don't have an OnlyFans.
Kidding.
I'm sorry.
His handle's Simplex.
But there's models around that have these virtuous loops in them. It's one of the things I love about Square's early model was that all we had to focus on, like, Square was this company that supported sellers and helped them like take transactions via credit cards. And all we had to focus on was helping a seller make more sales. And if they made more sales, we grew. And if we grew, we could help more sellers. And like, it was this very interesting virtuous loop. Whereas the advertising model loop, the other half of my life at the time, Twitter, felt relatively predatory. And using people and taking away from people instead of contributing to them and having a virtuous loop. I don't think all advertising is bad. Like, I think the classifieds model is an incredibly empowering model for people. I think the Craigslist model is incredibly empowering to people, and I think it can be, scaled to a massive degree, in a way that the individual owns the outcomes, and I hope to see that. But I think advertising today incentivizes all the wrong things. Incentivizes nasty headlines, incentivizes gossip, incentivizes really bad behaviors on the part of media to get clicks, to get more ads, to get ad revenue, to get commercials, to get pharmaceutical companies advertising with them, and then them threatening to take that money away definitely changes how a media personality might speak about something. Like, if you're putting something on the table, and you're supporting on it, it's you have to have a different perspective on it, and that compromises potentially your message.
Yeah.
So I think Bitcoin offers another alternative. If Bitcoin was around when we started Twitter, we would not have an advertising business. It'd be a very different company. I think it'd be very healthy, and I think it would be a phenomenal business. And I hope it can get back to that ideal, because we have the technologies now. But I think necessary to do that, it has to be on open protocols. It has to be on a Bitcoin protocol. It has to be on a Nostr protocol or an equivalent. It has to, maybe it creates its own protocol that it shares with the world. We intended to do that with Blue Sky. And maybe that pans out. I think all these experiments are great, but I don't think the singular owned company controlled protocol layer, that a company owns the protocol, the discovery, and the distribution. I don't think that scales anymore. I don't think that's right. It puts too much burden on the individual running it. It puts too much burden on Elon at the moment. It puts too much burden on Mark running these companies, and I don't think that is where the burden should be. The burden should be on the code, and the burden should be on the policy written as code.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting hearing all this, because like the Bitcoin community, or people that are interested in that stuff, like get so deathly obsessed with it and say it solves every problem.
Yeah.
And like they, I think, get like there's just some giant misunderstanding, because you're right. Like a money protocol that's open and fair, like puts power, like value back in the individual, like in such an important way, where if you like look back at history, and like it's impossible for any of this to be right or wrong, but there's like a decent claim to make that the Bank of England funded World War I in like a weird way. Like, oops, we didn't use pledged gold, we just did credit. And it created the momentum to like fuck shit up. And like money's that important. So when people say like,
there's a good Adam Curtis documentary on exactly that topic. I forget the name of it.
Yeah, it's like, so when you say like, if you can fix the money, you can fix the world. Like, I think that you've like your stories tell that. Can we spend a little time on Twitter? Like, do you, like, hearing you talk about it, I hear both like a sense of pride in being an early internet warrior, but then like a sense, like, do you have guilt in any of that?
Do I have guilt? In what sense?
Just like, you can be openly critical about, and I don't disagree with you, like these bigger companies, and unfortunately the way that they've been positioned is profit seeking, probably acts against the best interest of the people. Like fucking Mark is in front of Congress. Like, I mean, the guy is constantly being blasted by the Department of Justice, like all these things of how, like, how are you stealing privacy? Like, what data do you have? What governments are you working with? But it's all within his incentive. And then like you had categorized Twitter as part of that class of like companies, early internet, that unfortunately found themselves in a difficult spot where the best thing for the business was maybe not the best thing for the people. Like, do you, like, I don't know, man, like that's, I'd have to imagine that's like some fucked up shit to have to live through. Like,
yeah, I mean, I'm very critical of our of my and our actions in the past. Like I think a lot changed. The original sin was like we had an opportunity to be a protocol. Maybe we didn't have the opportunity. We had the potential, but we had to have money to pay the bills.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a lot of debates in early Twitter around being a protocol or being a company and closing things off. And ultimately, the other side of the debate won, and I was out of the company at that point. And I appreciate that we made that decision. I don't necessarily agree with it, and I'm happy that protocols are coming back into the mix at the moment. And I'm happy that we didn't create the protocol. That Fiat Jaff created a protocol. That Jay and Blue Sky is creating the protocol without any direction from Twitter is important. That Bitcoin was created as a protocol that's not owned by a company. So I'm overjoyed that this idea is finding root for things that I think become more and more fundamental to how we exist in this world. But after we decided not to be a protocol, we had to have a revenue stream. And I think Ev was working his hardest to find a non-advertising based revenue stream. I think he was working very hard to find something that fit within a Twitter model and was new. And I think, he was maybe on the edge of it when he was asked to leave as well. And then we got into promoted tweets and this race to become a public company. And again, like our CEO at the time, DeCastro, I love him. And he was doing the best with the information that he had, pushed us to go public. And we were in this category of like, how are you competing against Facebook and Google? And they are advertising giants, and you're this tiny little thing. And everything thus forward was measured against that. And that creates particular incentives within the company. So then we went public, and we, the growth started having challenges, and the product was confusing. And when I came back into the company as interim CEO, the word I heard the most was Facebook. And do you know how gut-wrenching that feels? Is like, we're not even saying our name. Like, what happened to our soul? You're only talking about the competitor. You're just looking over your shoulder. Like, you're just looking at what the other person is doing. You're not looking internally and like what you can do and what makes you you and what makes you unique. And we did these things, like we moved the favorite star button. It sounds small, but the favorite button to a like button. Why? Because Instagram did it, and because people know that now, and because we just like chipped away at our soul little by little, chipped away at what Twitter was. And like all these things need to be their own unique expressions of themselves. And then we did a number of things that I either wasn't paying attention to or didn't think was as important as growing the network, and felt like existential threats. Like we had a bunch of movements on the network around policies that we had around speech being allowed, and we reacted into that to come up with our current terms of service. And a lot of those decisions I think were correct, but they weren't done in such a way that earned trust, and they were fairly reactive instead of thoughtful. And in those moments you feel like you have these RIP Twitter hashtags trending for days, and there's a threat by the user base that they're all going to leave if you don't change this policy. But the worst one is when an advertiser comes in and says, we don't like what's going on here. You either change your policy or we're pulling spend. We don't need to spend money on you. We're good with Google and Facebook. We don't need you. And that has a spiral in terms of the investors. We're a public company. The investors learn that this huge advertiser has pulled, and obviously that's going to hurt our revenue numbers. So they downgrade the stock, and the stock price the stock price plummets, and then you have employees leave because they can get more compensation than other companies whose stock price is not going down. Rational decision for them. And because we didn't have dual class voting, dual class shares, a hedge fund comes in and says, we're replacing the CEO and the management team and all this, and we're putting our own person in, and then like the company dies 1,000 deaths, right? So I either didn't have the courage to stand up to our users or our advertisers in every particular case, or the focus to do the right long-term thing, or the push to do it. But at some point I realized like I am not the person to, I'm not able to do what I want to do with this company in this system as a public company, on Wall Street with this dependency upon advertising model, brand advertising. I'm not that person. Like, I don't want to be that person. And I didn't see a way out apart from quitting, which is what I did. And I had a lot of frustrations with our board, which is another reason, and a number of other things, but I just did not see a way to do that. And we tried to create the Blue Sky protocol within Twitter when I was there. It just took forever. Finally, it's, up and running. But the protocol work was the thing that gave me joy, because I saw a glimmer of a way to do it as a public company. But to be able to make the changes that we needed to make ultimately for the good of people more broadly, to truly serve the public conversation inclusive of everyone, to remove things like permanent bans, which I wanted to do, to create an algorithm store, to open source the algorithm such that people could fork it and choose their own to be able to turn it off, which we actually were able to put in at significant risk to our revenue. And again, questions from our investors, and again, had a price decrease when we announced that. I saw a glimmer, but it just wasn't enough. And I wanted to work on protocols. And I saw the other side of my life on Square, which became Block. I saw, no, this is what I love. Like, I love that I get to work with Bitcoin, and I love that anything I do for it betters it and us at the same time. And I just don't see a way out with Twitter until Elon came along and bought 9% of the company. And I'd asked him to join the board twice in the past, and our board ultimately said no to him joining.
Why?
Which was a disagreement. They just were a very risk averse board, and like he was doing a number of things, like the funding secured 420 tweets in the SEC, and
taking Tesla private.
I think they just wanted to distance themselves from all that. But to me, he was, he understood how to use the platform to a degree that I've only seen in a few people, in that he brought this incredible transparency of his life to bear. He had fun with it, obviously. And he was a technologist. And after I left, and I think he saw an opportunity, and I don't know what his intention was when he bought that 9%. I don't know if it was just to join the board or have some influence on the board in terms of the direction of the company with regards to speech, or ultimately to make a bid for the company. But to me, the only path for that company, and him and I talked about this, was that it become private. And because you have to remove the noise. You have to, that company has to be reset, because the whole revenue model needs to be reset. You can't do a reset away from brand advertising without a lot of noise in the market. And noise in the market for a public company means your stock goes up and down and is volatile, and you lose employees potentially. And we were on that path. We started Twitter Blue as a subscription product. We started working in commerce. We started doing uh, a different type of advertising that's not brand advertising. And all these things are in motion, but it was just going to be extremely, extremely slow.
Mm-hmm.
And the world fell off a cliff, especially the advertising technology world fell off a cliff just after Elon made his bid. And if Elon did not make the bid, the company, would have been in like a 10 billion valuation range, I imagine. And I think it would have had another activist investor come in and destroy the company from the inside. So I'm so grateful that he ended up buying it. I think there was a lot of needless stuff in the middle of making the offer and being sued by the company and then ultimately buying it. That's when I think things really went downhill, and it just became a hasty rush, and it became maybe vengeful and a number of other things. But I do believe it's right that it's private. I do believe that he will figure it out and will fix it. And I think the ultimate expression of it is that it be based upon a open protocol for his own sake and for the business. Because he's going to come into some tricky situations where he's going to be asked by various parties to derank or take down content. And if that is not completely open, he's just not going to earn trust. And I think he's making moves to open, but it has to be at the protocol level. It can't be anything but. Like, that's the only way to earn trust in this environment.
Well,
in my view.
on the concept of noise, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on when I think of a town square, I think of like a horse in a carriage, and you're riding in and you're there to air out grievances or bring up questions or concern about the larger area that you might be in. But the town square, for all intents and purposes, is provided to you. I would find it odd to air out grievances about the actual town square itself at a town square. In your position, though, you're the architect of this digital town square. And so not only do people air out grievances, again, with the world, questions, comments, concerns about, a wide range of topic given the size of a digital town square scales to every person, but you actually have people opining on the architecture of the town square itself. Yeah. And I think that what comes with that is just a tremendous amount of noise. I think it should be built this way. Advertisers think it should be built one way. Governments, regimes, powers that be think it should be built. How do you, or I guess, what's the importance of it, and how were you able to sort of shield the company from that noise, and how heavily did that weigh on you personally? Because I mean, ultimately, the brunt of
it's a huge weight. I don't think it's the right burden for anyone to bear. I don't think it's right for, like, I just think it's an incorrect model. Like, I think the burden has to be on the code. It has to be on the policy, and the policy has to be the code. And like, people can contribute to movements of that, but ultimately the market will decide what is the best policy, and the code will reflect that. And anything less than that is just going to come with some sort of compromise. You're making a compromise, and those compromises might be okay as long as you're willing to accept those compromises. Right now, like, if you're using Twitter, you're willing to accept the compromise that there is a single person that ultimately controls all the policy and the execution of such, and his decisions rule, and that's a fine compromise to make. But it's not the world that I want to live in, and it's not the world that I think is necessarily fair to anyone, to him, to the people using it, or anyone around it. So, like, if you truly want to complain about the architecture of the public square, change it. and that's the permissionless nature of a Bitcoin or of a Nostr. You actually have the potential to change it, and you can put it out in the market, and people might like it more, and then you win. But most importantly, the whole protocol wins. Everyone in the protocol, every other competing client wins as well. Where you just can't have that model with the current incarnation of a Facebook or a Twitter.
Does any of that stuff, though, like, really fuck with your, like, the Twitter files stuff, for example. I don't know if I've ever actually heard you talk about, because basically, like, I'm sitting with this guy who's been, without a doubt, like, instrumental to the world. Like, I personally think you're one of the greatest product minds in the history of humanity, just by your resume.
Thank you.
And I hear a story of a dude who has empathy, cares, was an early internet warrior, then put in this, like, in hindsight, like, which seems like just a difficult spot, like, where you have to run this company and keep it alive, but you found yourself at a juxtaposition with sometimes the best interest of the individual, so much so that you left and had enough self-reflection to then find something like Bitcoin and position what is now, I mean, how big's Block? Like $40 billion business or something, to have such a fundamental focus on open protocols. Like, that's like a pretty, like, ethical story of a person, moral, principled. Like, I've gotten to know you as, like, a really good fucking dude. But then, like, you go on the internet and supposedly your company was working. Yeah. And, like, I'm trying to understand this. Like, your company was working with the FBI and governments, and, like, how, like, is that true? Like, and like, what do you think about all of that? And, like, what happened? And, like, why do you, like, I don't even know how to make sense of all this stuff.
I mean, a few things. As soon as you're a company, you're going to have requests from government agencies to do particular things. There's no doubt in my mind that the current Twitter has similar requests. And it's a question of, you're a U.S. company. You have, you're a C Corp in Delaware. You're bound by U.S. law. And when the government comes a knocking, like, what do you do? And there's certainly overreach by the government in respect to companies like Twitter and during my tenure. I think the company fought a lot of it, but certainly did not fight all of it. And certainly COVID and the Donald Trump years was a very, very confusing time. And certainly people had bias in the company, and certainly people took actions that may not have been aligned with the company's interests, but may have been more personal grievance. I think those occurrences are extremely rare, but I'm sure they happened. And to my own fault, like, I would critique myself in that I probably did not pay enough attention to everything that's going on. Like, there's a lot in the Twitter files that obviously I was not on emails of, that I didn't know we were having that velocity of conversation with various government agencies. I didn't even assume such. I assumed, like, we'd have, a regular check-in, and that they were ideally helping point us to things that we should pay attention to. But to the degree that they were written like that was not something I was necessarily aware of. And that's probably on me, because I wasn't paying attention. I was paying attention to other things. I was paying attention to growing the network, getting away from brand advertising. For a year before I left, I was paying attention to, like, what I need to do to leave this company. So
do you feel a sense of betrayal in those grievances not being, or that discourse not reaching you in some way, shape, or form?
No, I think my management style has always been to trust the people, and to give them agency to do what they think is right, and that we build a culture that veers towards doing more and more right things, and that we have some self-corrective mechanisms in place. And maybe we didn't have enough of those in. Like, before I left, like, you can look at this. My tweet announcing my resignation is the email I sent the company, and the last line of that is, I hope we become the most transparent company in the world. Like, I hope you all do that. Our desire in the last few years of my tenure were a few things. One, we were going to build this protocol. Two, we were going to exist in a world where there were no more permanent bans, and we were actually going to have a process around an appeal so that we could remove those. And the team was working steadily towards that reality. 3, that we believed all moderation, content moderation, ultimately ascribed to the algorithms that are being used. And therefore, in order for people to have agency over Twitter, they should be able to turn the algorithm off, which was in Twitter for 3 years before I left. Or they should have the ability to choose what algorithm they want to use, and they can even make their own algorithm if they can program it. And we got this idea from Stephen Wolfram. So instead of transparency of the algorithm, because no one can figure these things out. Like, you open source the algorithms, they're so complicated. But you could actually just build a marketplace, an algorithm store, and you could choose which algorithm I want to use. I can use the right-leaning one. I could use the libertarian one. I could use the gossipy one. I can use the Disneyland one. That's like rated G for everything. But the important thing is I could choose, or I could not use any of them, and I see absolutely everything. That was the model we were moving to before I left and before all the issues. And I don't think people understand that. And with regards to Twitter files, I wish that all of our emails were just released, because people would see it, and people would see the context of what people were working with and how they were trying to make the best decisions, and the pushback they were giving to governments in the U.S. and around the world. And I think Matt and crew and Barry did an incredible job with this query tool they had access to originally, and then sifting through all these emails and whatnot. But ultimately, there's wisdom in a broader workforce there, and to just unearth everything and to release everything and make everything transparent, I think would be incredible. And I think it would give a much more fulsome story around the heart of that place. And I think it did have a good heart, and I think it was trying to do right by people in the world, and even do right by those on the right who think we're clowns and evil incarnate. I think it saw them and was trying to do right by them. Not everyone, of course, but generally we're directionally going that way. But we only understand what we get to see, and I don't think we get to see that. But independent of that, I never want that to happen again.
Right.
So hence protocols.
Right.
Like that's the solution. So right now, I have regret a little bit? Do I have guilt maybe about not being as courageous as I need to be, or paying attention to as much as I need to pay attention to? But all I can do is just build all my lessons and learnings into what fixes those problems, and that's why protocols, that's why Bitcoin, that's why Nostr.
Yeah.
Super valid.
I mean, in this whole conversation, I don't know, we all regret, we all live with some of that, because you can't do everything perfect, right?
Yep.
Last night I had too much of that fucking, my stomach hurt this morning, that dessert, whatever the fuck that.
The liqueur.
Yeah. So I regret that. I don't know, it's part of it though.
Yeah,
and then
course.
next time I won't fucking have as much. Anyway, what I hear in this conversation of your story is an incredible amount of self-reflection, which in the beginning when I was trying to really understand why you were tweeting shit like America has a problem, I didn't know you were at a Beyonce concert. That's so funny. But deeper than that.
But it also resonated with me.
Totally.
It's not just that was the current song up on the.
Totally. Yeah. So
it resonates.
This idea
She said
though,
it,
yeah, this idea that America as a culture, as a set of ideals, as a government, almost hasn't been able to do what, in my opinion, maybe you'd be uncomfortable saying this, did, which is you went on this path, then stopped, and you were this isn't good, and this isn't freedom, principled, moral, and you turned around, and then it's almost you found things like Bitcoin and Nostr, all of this new chapter of your life. And so is it correct in saying that what you see in Kennedy and why you like him is because he's a forcing function for America to look in the mirror And that, like he's asking these tough questions because you have this like, first of all, you have this Biden guy. Like, I hope this isn't too offensive, but like if that was my grandpa, I'd be embarrassed. I'd be like, what the fuck? Like, this is ridiculous at this point.
Yep.
And then you have the far right, but like then you have this dude, which now that I'm getting to understand you and living through this conversation, you have this guy that's not anything other than curious and honest and principled and really moral and really prioritizes ideals above all. And then it's almost a forcing function for our country and our corporations.
And has been through it. Like, it has made really detrimental personal mistakes. Like, he was a heroin addict, you know, and he, was very promiscuous, and he's learned from all those things and had the experience. And I trust experience more than anything else. And the fact that someone is able to change their mind based on an experience they have, presented with new data, presented with a new experience, the someone who has a power of observation and can truly, glean insights from that and learn ultimately. And I see him as that. But to your point, when I found Bitcoin and Square was starting at the same time, it definitely changed how I thought about building a company. And it certainly inspired what I wanted Twitter to become eventually. And there's no going back from that. And I think RFK Jr., like he paints a picture, a vision of an America I want to be part of and be proud of. One that wants peace in the world, one that strikes friendships with countries instead of threatens them from a military standpoint, one that brings back diplomacy and to his back to the ideals of his uncle with the Peace Corps. And having people who represent America, where America is celebrated and cheered and looked up to again, and not out of fear, but out of love. And I think that's what I hear from him. And he doesn't have all the substance right now, but you know what? He says, I don't know. I'm gonna go find out, and that's enough for me.
Yeah.
Like, how many politicians on record say I don't know, and embrace that as a way of like, okay, I just opened the door, now I'm gonna go find out.
Right. I mean, to be
Almost
clear,
none.
like this isn't a Kennedy advertisement. Like, just for transparency's sake, which this show is all about. Like, I have no advertisers, I have no agenda. I want to bring culturally relevant, public, authentic conversation about money and about life to the world. And so I've never voted. I don't know, is that a bad thing to say?
It's a thing to say.
It's a thing to say. I've never voted. No, I mean, like, I think this type of honesty, I hope people appreciate it. So like, this isn't a Kennedy ad, but now, like, I am, through this conversation, like really starting to appreciate the idea that we have someone that is willing to question out of the interest of progress and out of the interest of truth, not out of the interest of destruction.
Yep.
And that, like, your story of what you went through is something that hopefully, like, you think hopefully Mark goes through, it sounds like, or hopefully you think Mark Zuckerberg and I guess Mark Andreessen, or
all the Marks,
all the Marks. But like, when you're saying death of an empire, like maybe the empire to you is this like aggressive,
centralized corporate, I need to own every part of the stack mindset.
That's pretty fucking cool, man. Yeah, maybe I'll vote. I don't know.
I think it's.
You think Kennedy would talk to me?
I think so. I mean, his when asked about how he thinks he might win, he points to podcasts as like the step change in the field, and the fact that like he can go on all these podcasts and route around once again mainstream media, and reach an audience that is very particular to him and is probably attuned to what he wants to say and build from that. And I think generally he's I think he'd be biased towards talking with you, but I would encourage, like, I think voting is, a significant action that is a part of participating in this democracy that we're all creating. In the same way that you choose to run a Bitcoin node with a particular policy, that this is the equivalent of what we have. And do we wish that it was as clear as Bitcoin policy and code? Yes, absolutely. But we can vote for people who make it such. Like,
Yeah.
if you vote for someone like a Kennedy, you know, like, and he gets in, or someone like him that has these ideas. Like, I was a big fan of Andrew Yang because he was an entrepreneur and he came at it from a different perspective. And I think, you know, the DNC just like completely screwed that whole thing up, and picked, in my view, the worst candidate possible. But it is what it is, and here we are, and we have our opportunities to have a different answer now. And I think someone like a Kennedy, and there's probably others, would be open to looking at how we craft policy and how we run our country and bringing more transparency to that. And I think that's really important now. And I think obviously the world is changing. And we have our own government looking into like CBDCs and these central bank digital currencies. And obviously there's going to be some policies within those that not everyone appreciates.
After this conversation, if people don't understand the danger in that, right? Like,
yeah, I imagine that most people don't understand the danger.
well,
in
they
that.
should
Like,
watch this. I think
yeah,
that'd be clear.
but all you have to do is just point to China. You have a central bank digital currency in China that the government can expire at any point.
Yeah.
If they want to increase spending in the economy, they just say like, your money's about to expire in a week.
Yeah.
Everyone goes out to spend it because otherwise it's worthless. These are the capabilities that digital money enable. And if we are not aware of what those policies are, or who, more importantly, makes those decisions, it's that to me is the biggest threat to freedom.
Yeah.
It's not just like, that is speech, that is action, and that's everything. And I hope people are paying attention to the lowest levels, which money is. It's even lower than speech in many cases, because it's how I eat, ultimately, and how I feed my family and whatnot. And if that's compromised, and we have to put all of our trust into these central organizations that have unelected officials to make the right decisions, again, it's not necessarily even fair to them. I don't even know if they have negative intent. They're doing what they think is best for, probably selfishly themselves, and also for the government that they serve. And that might not be the full picture they need.
I mean, I just don't think people understand money generally.
Yeah.
Like,
I
I mean,
agree.
yeah. Like,
it's everywhere. And it's interesting, like, it's so emotional. It's a very emotional concept. Every single person in the world has felt the concept of money at some point in their life, and always has also felt bad about it. Like, just think about that. Like, everyone has felt bad about money at some point in their life. And why is that? I mean, there's a bunch of reasons why, but certainly the systems that we've created that are the concept of money help create that feeling. And I think we have a chance of enabling people to feel good, if not great, about money. And I think that's what a path Bitcoin presents. It's not a full road, and it's not a full answer, but it's a tool and a step along the way towards that.
even like the subtle, like Bitcoin brings so many subtleties that are so important. One of those is a reminder that money is a technology that we make.
Yeah.
And not like a thing that the government, like, basically, what I would want the people at home to know is that we developed money as a technology to solve this thing called the coincidence of wants, where like you grow bananas and I grow apples, and that's like what we do all day and how we expend our energy. And unless you coincidentally want my apples in exchange for the bananas, then like we cannot trade our contributions to society.
Yep.
Like, what if I don't fucking want bananas every meal?
Yep.
And so we created money as a technology to say, I can trade my apples and my bananas for money, and then I can trade that money for whatever I want. And it actually scales society. You have this huge problem. Like, do you know how Google Translate works? So Google Translate, if you have like 250 languages that need to be translated into 250 languages. Then you have each language that needs to be translated 250 times. It's like, what is it? The combinatory explosion? How do you say it, right? Combinatory explosion. So you know what Google did is they created one language model, and the translation goes into one common language that Google made, only to then translate it back out. That's what money is it's a common language to capture our collective contributions to society, and it's a technology. And sometimes like we build it and it works, and then like it gets broken, or we build a better one. But basically money is your representation of your contributions to society. So whether I work all day as a teacher, or I work all day growing bananas, or I work all day building block, like the representation and how I can use that energy to trade it for shit is money. And so can you imagine if like the Federal Reserve causing inflation, like they basically just like shat on my contributions to society because they made it worth less. By making my money worth less, it basically says like my life is worth less and my contributions to society are worth less. Like, dude, what the fuck? That's bullshit.
Exactly.
Like, because what? Because like you guys thought COVID was scarier than it was? Like, that's fucking ridiculous. Or like if there's a CBDC, like my contributions to society would be deemed like not worth anything at all if I didn't get a certain thing at the grocery store, or if I didn't like have a certain political opinion. So like the notion, like people don't understand that all money is a way for us to capture and trade our contributions to this collective like thing.
100%.
What the fuck? Like, anyway, I wish people understood that. And which why, like, if we can build a system that just doesn't put anyone, so that our collective contributions to society could be valued in a free market. Like if we really value people that mow lawns, then they'll have the big houses and stuff, and they'll get lots of Bitcoin for it. But if we don't, then they won't. But like that's perfectly fair way to value independent contributions to society, instead of like, anyway.
100% agree.
Yeah. Well, So I had topics that I wanted to make sure I covered, but my phone is sitting in the sun. It's like so overheated. So maybe we end soon. I know I wanted to, maybe on a little bit of a lighter note, ask you about hip hop. And then we can end. But like you love hip hop, right? It's like a huge part of your life. Like,
I love it.
Yeah. Like, I don't know, like a casual, like who's your favorite rapper? Jay?
I don't have these favorites, because like it's there's people for different moments and have brought different voices to the world and different
I know
expressions.
where this is going. We had this conversation at
dinner. I love Jay. I love Kendrick. I love in terms of just rap or all music. I love Nina Simone. I love Erykah Badu. I love Beyonce. Like I love Solange, like Radiohead, Baby Keem, Johnny Cash. Like all these people have taught me something different, and I don't know if I could like just say like there's one favorite, because there's a different moment. But those are the folks I keep coming back to, and I think that's the most important thing. Is I relearn every time I listen to them or hear them speak. I relearn something, and it casts something different into my consciousness. Like I've learned so much from Jay's album about entrepreneurship, and I've learned so much about expression from Kendrick, and I've learned so much about storytelling from a bunch of them, and precision from like Beyonce, and like just like all these are attributes that I aspire to, and they're very real humans, and they get up on stage and do something that might be slightly different from like who they are in person, because the stage always changes you a bit, and I learned in that too, like they're very authentic, but that stage kind of changes you.
Yeah. No, I just think it's interesting how influenced you are by music. And I also love your take on Kanye, because I agree with it.
No, Kanye is a true artist, and
True artist.
I love his work.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What's a true artist?
He's not afraid to express himself and be who he is and find himself and go deeper, and like he's gonna make a ton of mistakes along the way that society doesn't appreciate, but I think ultimately, like, he has no fear around his expression, what he believes, and I think that's I think it's rare, because the bias is always to self-censor and to shut down and to not express my truth, whatever truth that is. And truth is always collective, right? Like there's natural truth, which we talked about before, and then there's individual truth and there's collective truth, and they all relate, but they're slightly different, and they not sometimes they're in contrast with one another, sometimes they rhyme. In a way, in the phrase you've been using a lot. So
there was a trait about Kanye when we were talking, just getting to know one another. It wasn't change. What was the word? You admired his ability to. It wasn't change. Evolve.
Yeah. Well, like, question his entire art and like do something completely different that you would not expect him to do. And there's a number of artists that do that, like the Beatles. Obviously, you look at their whole discography and they changed dramatically. And Bowie did that, and Kanye certainly did it, and there's the Beach Boys, and I don't know. There's a ton.
Well, the reason why I ask, or the reason why I bring that into this conversation, is it seems to be an underlying theme that you really appreciate in a person.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that you brought up about RFK. It's something that you brought up about Zuck, with some of his recent actions, and I remember
the whole Western world.
Yeah, the whole Western world.
Yeah.
How important is personal evolution to you? Do you feel as though you're constantly evolving? Do you feel as though you've evolved?
Yeah, and I think that's natural. Like I think that's I think it's unnatural and an abstraction to stay in one particular mode for the rest of your life, and that's where you become, as an individual, more and more irrelevant, or as a company. Like, my greatest fear as our company is the same as Bitcoin. Like, it becomes irrelevant. And what does that mean? Well, like, just think about when you were kids. Like, did you skateboard when you were kids?
No.
Loosely.
What does that mean, loosely? You fell
That
a lot?
means I had a sort of entry point into my house that was on I would call it maybe a 12-degree incline.
And when you were a kid, like, you had no hesitation probably jumping on that skateboard, going down that small, tiny incline. That was probably less than 5 degrees.
Yeah.
And
it was flat.
It was flat.
It was flat.
It was basically like when they do the showers to drain the water a little bit, just like that. But anyway,
flat.
you had no hesitation jumping on the skateboard. But today, if I were to put a skateboard right here, you'd think about it a little bit. You might have some hesitation. And as we as individuals get older, we tend to get more precious about what we have, and we emphasize safety more. We don't want to get hurt, and we don't want things to change because things feel pretty good at the moment. And jumping on that skateboard represents a potential that I get hurt, that I break something that I'm precious about, like my arm, or that I don't feel good for some amount of time. And if you extract that to groups of individuals, like a company, like you have 100 people, or 10,000 people, the same behavior happens. Like, we started with one thing, we were brash, we were taking risk, we didn't, F these people and like F this system and whatnot. And then we succeeded. And we point that success back to those decisions that we made. And those things are like, now we're precious about those decisions. And we're precious about what we have. We made money. Like, we have all these people. We're precious about that. So we're going to hesitate a little bit to take on this new thing. And that's what worries me the most about any company or any technology, is you get too static, and you stop questioning, and you stop taking risk, and you You're ruled by hesitation because, and this is fair, because you're precious and because you love what you have. Completely fair outcome. But you're not going to move the world that way. And the world is always evolving. The world has no issue with taking out, this entire area with an earthquake. No issue. Doesn't think twice about it. Or a comet, half the world, or all the dinosaurs. No issue. So that's the natural approach, is like things are just always evolving the best they can until something existential happens, and that may change the board that the game is played on. And if we're not able to like constantly question ourselves and push ourselves and try new things and do things differently, then I think that's ultimately what made us human, is that ability to do so, because you don't necessarily see that in the rest of nature. Although you are seeing it now with the orcas going after all the ship rudders. I mean, that evidently like one female orca was hurt by a rudder, and now there's just a war against all rudders in any ocean that they find. The orca whales. Yeah, they're organizing to, which was our great power as humans. We have this ability not just to use tools, but to organize with each other to like take down a lion, whereas one individual person could not do that, even with a really good tool. But now these orcas are organizing to take out these rudders that hurt, this female member of their tribe, and they're going after all the rudders they see.
Are they winning?
They're winning. Yeah, they're destabilizing the boats. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
Team Orca.
Anyway, that's hip hop.
Yeah, I mean,
and punk before it.
Yeah,
but that's also why I appreciate hip hop and I appreciate punk. I grew up with punk music and I love it. It's because of a few reasons. One, they questioned everything. Two, they had no hesitation about being terrible at what they were doing. No hesitation at all. Like I would go to these punk shows in, a basement of a house in St. Louis, Missouri, where I'm from. And these people would get up on stage, 3 people, and they could not play guitar. They could not drum. They could not be in sync with one another. And they did not care. And I love that. And then a month later, go to the same basement, same people come up, a little bit better. And then like 6 months after that, wow, they're actually good. Mm-hmm. And then 2 years after that, they got a record deal. And that's what I saw in open source as well. You have all these people like writing terrible code, putting it out there, and just getting all this feedback. Some people are saying, "Oh, that sucks. You're a clown and you whatever." But the people that can take that and use it as a way to improve end up being Linus Torvalds or like Richard Stallman or all these greats in the open source world. Satoshi, Bitcoin Core right now. And that model of existing in society, I think is honorable. I think it's virtuous. I think it teaches everyone. I think it levels the playing field. And, I just want to be a part of that and support it. And hip hop was very much that. Hip hop started on street corners, and people battling each other and going over beats, and the DJs ultimately subsuming to the MC. But the DJ was on top at one point, and then the MC was a new thing that came into being because of these battles on the street and people not caring what people thought about them, and just like, I love this thing, I want to learn it, I want to do it, I'm going to be terrible, I suck, people just booed me off stage, but I'm going to come back in 6 months and they're going to be cheering.
Yeah, my favorite person to describe that, relating this back to, although they're not punk, but my favorite band, Nirvana, Dave Grohl talks about it, and he says we sucked and we sucked and we sucked, and then we sucked a little bit less, and then eventually we became.
I do have a favorite rock band, and that was Nirvana.
Yeah,
that was definitely Nirvana. They had everything.
So I was reading also like Rolling Stone's top 50 or 100 artists of all time, and they had artists write actually each section about a different artist, and I believe Iggy Pop wrote Nirvana section. But it was interesting because in the first album, Bleach, there's this song "Come As You Are," which sounds distinctly different than the rest of the album. But it was, you know, he was describing that if they were able to lean into that sound, they, you know, had the potential to become the biggest band on planet Earth, and they actually did pretty much exactly that.
And they cross over.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of appreciation for songs like "Smells Like Teen Spirit" in the hip hop community.
Yep.
Like it's huge. And when you achieve that, like when you can go beyond the genre that someone puts you in, like to me that's like true greatness. Like they don't have a label upon them. We talked about this before, but there's an artist named Robert Irwin, and he has a book called "Seeing Something is Forgetting the Name of What One Sees." And what he means by that, I believe, is like when you truly see something, the words fall away, the labels fall away, the bias falls away, the desire to like, I need to, like Jack is a Bitcoiner, Jack is a tech bro, like all that. When I truly see Jack as a human, when I truly see him, all that doesn't matter. Like none of it matters. And like there's artists in the world, and there's people that people don't see as like rock and roll anymore. It's just like, this is someone who expresses themselves, and they found resonance with themselves, and they found their truth, and like they have no name. Like it's just a beautiful concept.
Are you familiar? Do you know who Lil Peep is? Look into Lil Peep. I don't know if you'd like the music, but like these ideas, yeah. And everyone should look into Robert Irwin. I mean,
Robert Irwin's great.
One of the best, yeah. Yeah, I mean, punk is an energy. It's an attitude. You know, I would argue that punk is very American, but like the energy and the attitude and the approach, not like the color black or whatever. That's like very misunderstood. But yeah, like Bitcoin's very punk. This show is very punk. Fucking like Noster's very punk. Kennedy is punk.
I agree.
I think punk is like American cornerstone. Like I think it's a very healthy attitude and energy. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, I wanted to just talk about music because I think people also don't appreciate you as like a human. That was some intense shit we talked about. So I think it's like super relatable that you we go to dinner and like you play Jay, you play Young Thug, you play
Girl Talk.
Yeah.
Nirvana.
Well, yeah, I mean the sun like moved. It's been on me for like an hour. I don't know how long we've been sitting here, but I'm dying. I really got to fucking piss too. So look how many liquid here. I don't know how the cameras are angled on me, but I've just been pounding. I've been pounding liquids. So yeah, man, I guess, I don't know. How do I summarize this? Is that at some point over the last century, like incentives got a little bit weird, and we accidentally were very profit driven around things like war and anger and opposition and imposing ourselves, and we went from like the Peace Corps to this war industrial complex, which is just a very dangerous thing. That the dangers of centralization we talk about, right? That like again misaligned incentives and an inability to self-reflect with like this ultimate distraction of profit seeking and corporate incentives. Bitcoin, Kennedy, that he represents not necessarily like the far left or the far right, but a very like curious, self-reflective, passionate truth seeker, which America maybe has not had in quite some time. Kanye is a fucking a true artist, and although he upsets people, I always like to say, like, what if Van Gogh was alive today? And he was like posting on Instagram like he just chopped his ear off and like sent it to some fucking girl, like, but he's a true artist too. Yeah, I don't know, do you have any other questions?
No.
Incredible.
I think the thread of our conversation, at least in my view, is like, I think we're in a moment of time where we're stepping back and like looking critically at the abstractions we've created upon the natural world and questioning those. And what I see in like an RFK is he's doing that in a particular case around regulatory capture. Regulatory bodies and this military industrial complex and the pharma industrial complex and the tech industrial complex, all these things. Complex itself means like these highly dense connected networks that are very hard to pierce through, but ultimately they're abstractions that we've created that are human made, and are probably trapping us right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Satoshi was one of the most impactful in my life, to pierce through an abstraction layer that needed to be pierced, and that is money, and how money moves and how it works and how it's trusted or not trusted. So I think Kennedy represents, and others, not just him, but there are many others, represent like a questioning of all these abstractions that we built up. And I think it's the right thing to do. And I think it's a courageous thing to do. And I think everything that we get out of this time, hopefully, goes into policy written as code, because it at least gives us an opportunity for everyone to both see it, to understand it, and also to change it if they don't like it. And I think, Bitcoin is a beacon and a model for that, but not the end all be all. But if I were to take anything away from this conversation, or want anything to be taken away, is that let's look critically at the abstractions we create for ourselves, whether as an individual, as group of individuals, as communities, or as governments, or as the world, and really and question them, and kind of get back to the natural fundamentals. And maybe they're the right abstractions, but maybe they can be improved. Certainly they can be improved. Or maybe we don't need them at all. Maybe we can just be barefoot all the time.
Yeah. No, in all seriousness, I think it's a super unique time to be alive right now. I'm very grateful for that. And I think it's I'm very grateful for you having such authentic conversation with us. That's what this thing is all about, really, is surfacing a lot of
for the venue.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
I appreciate you, brother.
Appreciate you.
Well, yeah, I don't know what we're about to go do. But I got to pee. Well, how do we sign off?
Money matters. Thanks, Jack.
Money matters. That's money.
That's money.
All right.
That's
peace.
money that matters.
And that's money that matters.